Welcome to You Don't Know Ball. Today, we are going to be going over the NFL teams' floors for the 2024 NFL season. We did all the ceilings last week, so now we're going to move into the floors. As always, we're going to go division by division. So this is basically worst case scenario for any NFL team. Dobbs, where do you have, starting off in the AFC East, the Buffalo Bills?
So I have worst case scenario for the Bills being just barely missing the playoffs, right? And I want to be completely clear and transparent with everybody before I even start. Before we even start, this needs to be explained. I did not take into account the whole because I started doing this and then I realized how quickly that it would just make this incredibly boring. I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, if the team's starting quarterback gets injured, here's the
Yeah.
scenario. Because if I did that for every team is it has a terrible floor. I'm looking at it from the perspective of team stays healthy, and this is the worst case scenario if you have a healthy team all year, right? So just to be clear, so for me, worst case scenario for the Bills, barely missing the playoffs, as I said, and the reasoning is more than anything. Look, the Bills have shown us they have high pedigree, they have one of the best QBs in the league, and generally speaking, that's enough of a combo to get you in the playoffs a lot of times, right? It's a QB-driven league. Yes, the receiving talent has taken a bit of a dip when you lose Stephon Diggs, but you look around and you say, okay, you know what? We've got a very solid line relative to the rest of the league on the offensive side. Our defensive line has two really good players and a lot of ascending younger guys and just guys that have proven that they can play in the NFL consistently. Our linebacking core added Terrell Bernard, which is, in my opinion, a huge addition nobody really has been talking about, but big addition in free agency this year. And as far as the DB room goes, yeah, you're not the highest on your safety room per se, but you still have a damn good corner room. And in the reality situation is more than anything, as I said earlier, look, the Bills have shown us they have the pedigree. When you have the pedigree, you have the coach that knows how to get you back and back to the playoffs over and over again. Generally is the recipe. And besides losing Stephon Diggs and, a few other guys, and yes, they were big guys for what the Bills have done, but they were aging. You can't expect an aging guy to produce the same as he was. All the Bills really did is kind of move on, and that's the reality of the situation. And I think that they moved on into a situation that's a little bit worse now, but I don't think they're going to make this huge drop off like a lot of people are thinking.
Yeah, I think this is something that they can build on. I think when a team has success for so long but isn't able to get over the hump, you have to take that one step back. And obviously, as a floor, I just think Josh Allen gives them such a high floor, and they should be in playoff contention every year because I had them as well as barely missing the playoffs because I don't think a lot of people are super high on the Bills in terms of oh, they're probably going to go super far this year. And it'd be kind of crazy to see them go far this year after everyone has been so high on them the last couple of years. And who knows, maybe that happens. But I think the expectation for the floor of the Bills is that they will be kind of like a wild card team, maybe a division winner. So with that being said, I would say their floor is probably just scraping that playoff, that 7th seed, and maybe missing out, like you said. So moving in to our next team, we have the Miami Dolphins. So I have them a little bit lower than you do. So you have them as barely missing the playoffs. I have them as a top 16 pick. What scares me is I just don't know how Tua is going to play this year. Yes, he had a decent year last year. The contract negotiations are still going on. He doesn't have a deal. You take Chop Robinson, who I don't know if he's going to contribute right away. I think it would have been very beneficial for them to go for a guy like Graham Barton. And their interior offensive line still scares me. Their offensive line scares me as a whole. Teron Armstead, kind of a question mark if he's healthy. You bring in Brewer. I'm blanking on his last name or for his first name at center. Then you have Austin Jackson at right tackle. Yeah, Aaron Brewer. And so it's just yes, you get the ball out quick, right? That's the whole thing to try to neutralize the issues with the protection. But you go and sign OBJ, who is 30 plus years old. He hasn't really been able to stay healthy. And once OBJ goes down, that wide receiver 3 room is looking kind of iffy. And do you want to count on your pass rushers that, tore their shit last year and bank on Chop Robinson being able to make an impact day one? And that's just why I think they can be a top 16 pick. The Dolphins are one of the shakiest teams in the NFL to me.
So again, look, I'll say you made a damn good case. I can't blame you for thinking what you're thinking at all, right? But in my opinion, I'm gonna have to disagree only because I think, and again, this is we have very similar viewpoints, but I think I view it a little bit differently in terms of like I don't look like in terms of regular season play. Tua is a top 10 quarterback right now, right? Like it's like when Tua's out there like doing his thing week to week, it's generally a pretty good week. And so that's why I gotta give credit where it's due. Like he didn't we're not missing anybody important now. Like it's not like we lost anybody crazy on offense. And to your point, OBJ is getting old, but it's not like it's a bad addition. And like I've also been saying, I've been kind of saying the whole off season, you added pass catchers in the draft also, where I feel like, there's guys who can come in and produce in this offense right away from day one. The way that the offense is designed with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle kind of just taking everybody, you're gonna have guys underneath that are able to do their thing. And as far as the O line goes, I'm with you. Like the O line is still definitely a concern. The O line is definitely still far from feeling shored up about because there's a lot of question marks. Even, I'll go back to Teron Armstead. If I'm not mistaken, there was a lot of like he might be retiring.
Right.
We don't know his status going. So that kind of tells you a lot already, like in terms of like there was already uncertainty going into the season. You have to wonder how someone's going to play when that was the case going into the year. There is a lot of question marks on the offensive line. But then over to the defense. There's been kind of this narrative like the Dolphins are soft as shit on defense. I see a lot of I read the comments, like everyone's the Dolphins are soft as shit. Look, as much as the Dolphins didn't have a good year defensively last year, I think the reality is when you look at it on paper, though, they have guys that can play. And the biggest problem is just that their pass rushers, to your point, don't stay healthy and haven't stayed healthy. But if these pass rushers can stay healthy, and now with Shaq Barrett and Chop Robinson, like you have a damn good deep pass rushing unit. It's just a matter of being able to stay out there. But as far as the DB room goes as well, when you added Jordan Poyer this year, like you have a really good DB room now as far as your starters. You have really good depth with Cater Kohu, Cam Smith, Needham. Like you got depth. It's not the greatest depth in the world, but you got it. And I think that's kind of just the biggest thing is when I look at the Dolphins, I'm like, okay, you know what? They're not like an absolute world beating roster. And a lot of people were mad that I had them or you had them in the Super Bowl contending tier in as far as the ceiling goes. But that's the thing is I think that's just how I look at it. Like at their absolute ceiling, this team could win a Super Bowl. Is it likely? Like, I don't think it's likely at all. And then in terms of the floor, it's like, I don't think their floor is very low. Like, I still think this is a playoff team. I think they have a depth where you need it. And that's kind of just the bottom line for how I look at the Dolphins.
I'll do barely miss playoffs for this one. You sold me a little bit. My only kind of counter argument to that before we move on is they had 11 wins last year. The Seahawks had 9, and the Seahawks picked 16. So it's kind of like it's really close. It's really close. So I'll give it to you there. New England Patriots, we both have as a top 3 pick. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory. Brand new coaching staff, brand new rookie quarterback. Jacoby Brissett may be playing. You have question marks on the offensive line, question marks kind of in the receiving room, question marks kind of on defense. I think as a whole, if you were to list every single position on the New England Patriots, there would be far more question marks than there are answers. And that goes into the coaching staff. And I think at this point, ownership. I think you don't know, like, why are you interviewing GMs after you just had a draft? Why would you not try to get a GM earlier? I don't know. I don't know if they're going through with the GM position or if it's Elliott Wolf going to be making all the decisions. He basically sounds like a GM. I just feel like this franchise won for so long, and now the Mac Jones project didn't work out. And I think they're doing the right thing. I think they are kind of restarting, rebuilding to an extent, but I don't know if they necessarily set up Drake May to succeed this year.
Well, yeah, again, I'll keep echoing the same sentiment. Like, if Drake May is going to have success this year, it is going to be like a Justin Herbert-esque, like, yo, this guy's so much more pro ready than I thought he was. Like, yo, he made a huge jump in terms of like all he did was focus on football from the second that the draft process started until the day that the training camps ended and camp ends and we're starting the actual season, right? Like, if that's the only way it's going to happen. And again, I'm not there seeing these practices. I'm not here seeing Drake May's work ethic. I can't guarantee anything along those lines. But in terms of what I expect, right, we don't expect that to happen. Right? And again, I'm not. Look, Drake May. The verdict is still to be decided because I don't know. I have to see how he develops. But as far as this season, to your point, I don't think we're going to see even much of him. I don't think, and I think it would be smart for them to play it that way, as we've said the whole offseason. I don't necessarily expect to see Drake May much, if at all, this year. I think the Patriots know that they still have a lot of building to be done. And everything you just said, right? Like, you can't point at one spot of the ball in this team, besides maybe the DB room, the starting DBs, and say, like, all right, like, we got a really well-rounded unit. You can hand pick guys that are definitely really good at their position on this team, but you can't handpick a bunch of them. And you definitely can't handpick a way that this roster is going to win a bunch of games this year, if above 5-6. So that's why it's pretty simple to us. The Patriots have to be in that bottom tier of expectations.
And honestly, Pats fans, you should want to be a top 3 pick next year. Like, the way you have your quarterback. So if there's a guy in the top 3 that someone wants, you could trade out and get assets. Like, the Patriots are so much further away, like, than a lot of other teams. And when you have a young quarterback, you want to maximize their rookie contract. And the way to do it is, in my opinion, lose a lot of games. So moving on to our final team of the AFC East. And I want to apologize. I'm dealing with some sinus issues, so I probably sound all crazy. The New York Jets. So you have them as a top 16 pick. I have them as barely missing the playoffs. Where is that discrepancy? Why do you think that they are closer to a top 16 pick other floor than it is barely missing the playoffs?
Well, because I think, and then the Jets would probably have like the widest margin for anybody in terms of like the ceiling and the floor. But the reason is just like, look, let's break it down as simple as possible. We're already seeing that the writing on the wall that, and again, I don't buy into any of this shit. Let me be clear right off the bat. Like, to me, it's all just noise and bullshit. But you can already see the narrative the media is trying to spin. A-Rod, he's missing camp. He got other shit to do, and he doesn't care about the team, right? That's already what they're trying to spin it into. When in reality, man has been to 20 training camps, and he's just at that point of his career. It is what it is. Like, he's Aaron Rodgers, man. How much is he going to gain from getting a little bit of repertoire with his guys before? You know what I mean? And I'm not sitting here trying to defend him, but I'm also just looking at it objectively. Like, it's not as big of a deal as the media is making it out to be. But let's tie this together and say that some way, somehow, he doesn't get the rapport he needs, and he's just not the same Aaron Rodgers. And that injury took a big toll on Aaron Rodgers. And again, I'll say the Jets were the one team where I did throw the contingency in, because normally, again, I said I wouldn't think about injuries.
I was going to say, it almost has to with this
coming off the Achilles, I have to understand and really put it into the equation that, like, there's a somewhat chance that he could miss a solid chunk of time again if something were to go wrong, which is certainly not incredibly unlikely, right? Like, yeah, they did revamp the O-line, but everyone they revamped it with is an older guy who is also potentially injury prone. If injuries start stacking up, that's really just how I looked at it. If injuries start stacking up, we know how this offense is, right? That's really all there is to it. Like, if injuries start stacking up, we know how the Hackett show goes. We've seen the story multiple times. I just feel like, and this was the final thing, this defense played so fucking good last year. Every single second, every single snap when they needed to, and they still, right? And they finished much better than we expected. It's still like right around that range where you're like, right around that 500 range. I don't know if I think that the defense could do that again this year if they had to do that again this year. You know what I mean? Like, not to sell them short, it's just really hard to play that well every single game, especially 2 years in a row. Like, it's just a lot of, and that's the thing. We're talking about it in terms of floor. That's if everything goes wrong, right? I mean, I don't expect it to go this way, but if it did, I could see them having another pick where you're like, all right, you know what? The Jets they really got to start thinking about the future at that point.
So I was kind of back and forth on this because we are only one tier apart, and I think I'll go with the top 16 pick. I think a lot of my restraints or like concerns come from injury, and I was trying to keep injury out of it as much as I can. But like you said, like, this is a team that's kind of hard to ignore when you have injury-prone linemen like they are. Then you bring in Mike Williams, who is one of the most injury-prone receivers. And to go back to your point, obviously, like, I think Tyrod Taylor is a step up from Zach Wilson or whoever the fuck they're, Chris Strevler, whoever's going to be playing quarterback for them. They never should have got rid of Mike White. But with that being said, I will agree with you. Like, if the offense isn't doing its job, and let's just say Aaron Rodgers is not available, the defense is not going to do what they did last year, because I feel like it's just going to be one of those, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, this is not going to get us anywhere. Like, it's so over with. I just think it would be such a morale and confidence killer if anybody but Aaron Rodgers is playing quarterback for them next year. So I will agree with you that top 16 is probably the spot that they're going to be at because they were at 11 this year. So, yes, I think they improved, but I don't know if it's, enough to get them out of the top 16 if that scenario goes down. So this team.
If shit hits the fan
Yeah.
again, like
This team and probably one other team is like the only other teams we'll probably do like injury concerns for. But that'll wrap up the AFC East. Moving in to the NFC East, we have the Dallas Cowboys. I have them as a top 16 pick. You have them as barely missing the playoffs. I'll kind of give my spiel. Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons all got to get paid. You had a really shitty run game last year, and you supplement that by Zeke. Like you signed Zeke. So then my other concern is, okay, what if CeeDee Lamb isn't healthy? Brandon Cooks is a 30-year-old plus wide receiver, and then you have Jalen Tolbert. While I think Jake Ferguson is a good tight end, I think there is some question marks on the O-line as well. You lose Dan Quinn, so you know how, amped he had their defense last year and how much that they excelled. And then they lose a couple pieces as well. They lost so much in free agency compared to what they added in the draft and in free agency. I mean, you bring Eric Kendricks in as a linebacker, but it's like his prime days are kind of getting there. So I just can see them being one of those teams that just kind of has an off year. I know Dak does really well. He has good years and bad years. It's kind of like this. And I know a lot of people are on the hot seat there, but it just seems like a year that if the wrong person gets injured or just something goes wrong chemistry-wise, it just seems like a year that there could be a lot of change in Dallas.
And no, and I completely understand that. I think, the way I looked at it was just like, I looked at it like Dak's can have another good year. But to your point, I was considering like, it's very true. Like Dak's career, and you kind of forget about it just because whenever he has the good year, you forget about the down years that were before.
Whenever he has a good year, he's an MVP and they're about to go to the Super Bowl. And then whenever they go have a bad year, they're like, oh, is Dak the future? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's always back and forth with them.
No, and that's what it is. It's a very weird kind of contingency that Dak brings along. But because it's very unique, you really don't see it much anywhere else. Like if ever, it's a very weird spot that Dak is in. But I think, to the point, I do have a lot of faith in the way this offense is built. I think at this point, it's the McCarthy system, right? So it's like I have faith that McCarthy's going to keep calling the right stuff and keep Dak efficient. But I think what I worry about more is to your point, like you were saying, like, right, Zeke in the run game. Like now we're adding two completely new guys to the line and young guys, very young guys at that. One of them who's incredibly raw is Tyler Guyton, where it's like, however you tell a guy right now, it's like, yeah, he could have a fantastic, ceiling. But even in terms of like how his rookie year is going to look, I don't expect a ton this season because there's just so much room to grow from the tape. Like, I worry more about the line play than anything. And I think then when I go to the defense, I'm like, okay, you know what? The linebacking core is what scares me the most. Like to your point about Kendricks and Lafu, like, okay, I've been hearing, that they've been saying Zimmer's been saying a lot of good things about Marist and that he's so pro ready, he's gonna be really good. But it's different when you actually got to get out there and play the games, right? So again, with that linebacking core, it's a little bit concerning. But everything else in the defense, you look and you're like, okay, I'm pretty confident in this defense still, And I think that's just kind of how I look at it. Like, yeah, the Cowboys could end up missing the playoffs, but like they really shouldn't. And that's why I had them where it's just like their ceiling or their floor is still just kind of making the playoffs and having literally to me just another Cowboys year. Like not much has changed, like for the better or the worse, just not much has changed.
Okay. So I guess I'll fold with the barely missed playoffs, and I'll tell you why. This has been my determining factor on if I fold or not. If I was going to put $100 down on a tier, what would I feel more confident is going to happen? And I would say that they probably barely missed the playoffs outside of being a top 16 pick because they did pick at 24 last year. So that would be about a fourth of the league dropping. 8, 16, 24, 32. So I'll do barely missed playoffs. New York Giants. We have a bigger, it's still one tier, but you have them as a top 3 pick.
All right, I got to break it down for the Giants fans because this is all right. Let me preface this with this. I actually really didn't want to have a third team in this tier, but I felt like it would have been wrong if you know what I mean. If I didn't, I was like,
I'm not gonna lie to you.
I only have 2 teams.
I was thinking about it.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, if I only have,
Yeah.
because I'll say this, spoiler alert, kind of. Initially, I had the Commanders in the slot for the final top three pick, but I was thinking about it and I was like, I'm looking around and here's the reality at this point. I have much more faith in Dan Quinn bless you. I
Thank
have
you.
much more faith in Dan Quinn to figure out the situation with the defense, get this defense way back on track, and that Jaden Daniels is going to surprise a lot of people and have a much more productive rookie season. Then, on the other hand, having faith in as much as yes, we know Dable and yeah, Dable can figure shit out, right? Dable's one of those guys that is going to figure shit out. But with the situation he has right now on offense, even throwing Malik Neighbors in the mix and seeing how amazing he's looking at camp, right? I just don't think, which is no surprise to anybody who's followed anything else you related. But side note, like this is, it's like I just don't. It's like one of those situations where it's like no matter how I'm just trying to think of the right words for this. Like, I don't have any faith. Let me just make it as simple as possible. I don't have faith in any situation the Giants have around quarterback right now. And I think to your point about being a morale killer, it's kind of like the Giants are very similar, almost in that same tier to like the Jets, where it's like you can only play really good defense so much, and you can only do so much on the defensive end with all the good names you have on defense before you just look at the offense and you're like, man, these fuckers aren't doing anything for us. And it's only a matter of time before you start to see effort dipping. And again, it was kind of like it was between the Commanders and the Giants. I just feel like the writing is almost just so on the wall with the Daniel Jones situation that it's like I can see the Giants just crashing and burning, especially with that New York media pressure on top of it. It's like I can just see it being a crash and burn, but really bad versus the Commanders. I can see also crashing and burning, but I have less faith in that happening than I do with the Giants.
See, here's the thing though, Dobbs, is I could see Drew Lock coming in and just lighting it up. I mean, I'm not talking about like having a great year. I'm talking about I'm trying to think like a Ryan Fitzpatrick type of thing where he's just out there slinging that shit because like they're not going to win in the run game. They're not going to win in the run game. So maybe Dable unlocks Drew Lock. And I know this is a horrible pitch to anybody listening, but that is why I could see them being top 10 because I guess my issue is the Giants have sucked and they added very good pieces. You know, depending on how you feel about Brian Burns, right? Like he is a good player. I just don't think he's that elite type of player that people think he is. And then also losing Xavier McKinney. I like Tyler Newman, but I don't know, how much difference he's going to make. So you have a great defensive line. You have Bobby Okereke as well. But when you look at the receiving core, you have Malik Neighbors, Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson. Yes, you have Andrew Thomas, Evan Neal we're gonna play this game again. Like the interior, the offensive line is okay. I think they should be okay enough to be in that top 10. And I don't see this team being a top 3 pick. I think they are better than that. And I would rather put my money on a top 10 pick than a top 3 pick.
And no, I completely understand that. I totally do. Again, it was literally just a toss up for me, and I wanted to give a little bit of faith to my maybe a little bit of LSU bias. I just couldn't sell my boy Jaden Daniels like that yet. I was like, I gotta give what I mean. I gotta give
Yeah.
Jaden some time, faith in Dan Quinn. I also just want to say before we move on to the next team, a little bit of a little tangent here to pay attention to your point. Xavier McKinney, as we know, was playing free safety last year. Well, it's not even like you're replacing McKinney with Newbin because Newbin's over here playing strong safety on the depth chart. And now you're going to have Jason Pinnock out there, which, in the nicest way possible, it's a downgrade. Like it's a downgrade at positions. You know what I mean? Unless Pinnock has an absolute complete career turnaround this year, which anyone can, I'm not trying to sell anyone short, but in terms of, as I always say, in terms of statistics, that's kind of how I look at everything. Statistically, how likely is that he's going to produce anything replicating Xavier McKinney last year? Not very likely. So the bottom line is that as for as many upgrades as the Giants did make, they downgraded a lot too. So there's just a lot of questions about the Giants, no matter how you want to slice it.
Let's go top 3 pick. This is the floor. Let's get a little crazy. So Giants fans, I know you're gonna hate it. Philadelphia Eagles.
I'm selling shit good today, bro. I'm like a salesman today.
I'm trying to, when we do like the ceilings and floors, because they are literally either all the way this way or all the way that way, I'd rather go more on the extreme because we know it's going to be in the middle somewhere. And with the Philadelphia Eagles, we have them both as an early playoff exit. This team revamped in the offseason. They added Saquon Barkley. They had a really good draft, adding Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Losing in the first round or second round would almost be a disappointment. They should be going to the NFC Championship or the Super Bowl this year.
Absolutely. And again, like with a team like the Eagles, and it's actually a very good thing. Like Eagles fans, it's a good thing. If there's not a ton to say about your team, it's for the best. It's usually very much for the best. And all I really need to say about the Eagles in terms of like why that it's even justified. Like you're in a position where guys you drafted, you can just move around their positions. You're so well built that you can just mold guys to figure out however you want it. Like there's so much depth on this roster right now that the Eagles are literally they're just gonna, as they are, they're moving guys. They're just figuring out the best plan for everybody. And on top of that, they're like I sound like a broken record, but there's just so much depth. When there's this much depth and good players all over the roster, you just can't sell a team short. And we'd be selling them short by just not saying that they're gonna be a playoff team. I want to add too, just something that I thought was interesting because, and again, Eagles fans, help me out here if you've been at training camp or anything like that, because I'm a little confused. On ESPN's official depth chart for the Eagles, Cooper DeJean is now listed where he's not even on the cornerback depth chart. He's just purely on the safety depth chart, and he's currently number 2 behind Reed Blankenship. And it's interesting because, again, like, Reed didn't have like a great year last year, but he also certainly didn't have like a terrible year, like a bad year. He was kind of like right in that, like, and I would say he leaned toward the better range than a lot of safeties, like, right? He leaned toward the better range. So all of a sudden we're in a situation where it's like Cooper DeJean is the backup. And also I want to add though, because ESPN's depth chart doesn't list slot corners, Cooper would probably be the starting slot corner, assuming, right? So it's kind of going to be interesting where I'd assume he's probably going to be moving around from safety to slot, kind of just depending on what package they bring out. But just something interesting to monitor because that's kind of something I've said the whole draft process. Like, I don't even know what position this man is going to play. And we still don't know what position this man is going to play. So it's just something interesting to monitor here, a little side tangent. But the bottom line is the Eagles are going to be a good team. The only way they're not a good team is if Jalen Hurts and Saquon get injured, and then all of a sudden it's a complete toss-up. But again, we're not incorporating that into the...
Then it's the Kenny Pickett show. But they also did add Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore. So moving on to our last team of the NFC East, we have the Washington Commanders. You have them as a top 10 pick. I put them at top 3. I don't think they'll be top 3. I think there are games that Jaden Daniels will win with his legs that'll get them out of that top 3 discussion, even though maybe a top 3 finish would be good for the team.
Yeah, see, I'm in the same boat as you, where it's like that's kind of thing when I was breaking down the Giants and the Commanders, I was kind of just like, teams know how to defend Daniel Jones. Like, if there's going to be, like, to your point, there's going to be times where teams just aren't all the way ready for Jaden Daniels. They're not all the way on his tendencies. That's the luxury you get when teams don't have any tape on you yet. And what scares me though so much about the Commanders is just the receiving core depth, the running back depth. Like, there's just a lot of question marks. The O-line depth, like there is a lot of questions on the offense. I think what sold them for me is I already kind of prefaced with our little Giants section was like, but you come over to the defense, and even though, right, I'm still not very high on the pass rushing situation, as we talked about with Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn, he finds ways to free up his guys. He finds ways to free up his pass rushers no matter who you are. It doesn't really matter. He's going to find a way to get you, just a free rush, a one-on-one consistently. It's just the way this scheme works, right? It always has. And so now we're bringing over the Dan Quinn scheme. We have 3 really... one Hall of Fame and 2 really solid young linebackers that are ascending. And, the DB room, the DB room is still very rough in terms of just how guys are grading out and how guys look. But to that point, with the Dan Quinn system coming in, you don't know how things are going to change because it's going to be very different than things looked last year. So I think there's enough question marks in a positive way for the Commanders that's why I was like, that's why I gave them the edge. I was like, okay, you know what? Enough positive question marks as opposed to the negative question marks. Like,
I would much rather bet on them being a top 10 pick than a top 3 pick. I just think even adding guys like Bobby Wagner and Austin Eckler, they're older, whatever. That just raises the floor of your team in terms of just leadership and what I'm trying to think of, like, of competence even. Like, a defense run by Bobby Wagner is going to have a different level of competence than a defense ran by, backup number 5. So with that being said, the Commanders finish out at a top 10 pick as their floor. Moving into the AFC North, we have the Baltimore Ravens, and we both have them as early playoff exit. Similar to the Eagles, this team, yes, they did lose I would say they have more question marks than the Eagles because of their offensive line. And on top of that, I feel like the expectations on Lamar have not been raised high enough. I feel like they just have not been able to get it done in the playoffs. And at some point, you're going to have to point at Lamar. So I think expectations for the Ravens this year are higher than normal, where it needs to be an AFC championship or Super Bowl, because if it doesn't, then it's like, okay, how many years are we going to do this?
No, and that's a great point, and it's true. I think, yeah, and you know what? Like we agree 100%. Like, it's the bottom line is that this is a team who should make the playoffs. I'll add though, what is the most concerning? I think of any of the teams when I looked, where for sure actually of teams where we had them tiered out, like, well, they should for sure make the playoffs. They're going to make the playoffs if Lamar doesn't get injured. But what's to that point, like, if Lamar were to get injured, the QB backup options on this team specifically, it's like, man, like I don't think that these guys are getting me to the playoffs. Like Josh Johnson, Devin Leary, Emory Jones, like
Whoa, don't hit
that's
on
rough.
Devin Leary.
That's rough. We're at the point now where then you have two rookies on the depth chart, and then you have Josh Johnson. And we saw how that went with Josh Johnson when he had to replace Brock Purdy in the NFC chip game. So, you know what I mean? Like, again, no disrespect to Josh Johnson. He's been in the league a hell of a long time. Clearly, he knows his stuff. Clearly, he deserves to be in the league. But coming to replace Lamar Jackson, you know what I mean? You're not going to be able to do it to the level you need to do it. And and again, to the skill positions, that's where it's tough. Like that's why I sometimes have to look in. You say to yourself, like, that's Lamar's one pass. It's like this team has just never went all in, just giving Lamar his alpha. Like they've given him. They really. If you want, okay, Mark Andrews is his alpha, but again, you want to have an alpha tight end, and you also want to have an alpha on the outside, or in the slot for that matter. And as much as I love Zay Flowers,
wide receiver too, they've never had that dominant wide receiver too.
Well, and also to that point, I'll even add Devontae Walker still hasn't even cracked starting on the depth chart above Nelson Aguilar as of right now. So like we're in a position where still Nelson Aguilar is your slot or outside slot, wherever he's going to play. And I don't know. Like I feel like that's a little concerning if you're a Ravens fan. I know we're still very early in the process. I get it that he's very young, but I think it just serves to the point. Like this team still hasn't given Lamar necessarily the tier of playmakers that you want to see them giving him consistently. And yes, I know I sound like a little bit of a hypocrite because, as I've said, and I will say, like the great pocket passers, the ones who can just stand back there and dial it up, it doesn't really matter who you give them. They're going to find a way to make it work. But to that point, you also then you need to have an incredibly elite O-line. Ravens have a really good O-line, but they've been missing a piece here or there the last couple of seasons. Hopefully this year when you get Andrew Voorhees back from the injury from last year, when he didn't even play at all, if Andrew Voorhees can step in and be the prospect a lot of people thought he was, and Roger Rosengartner is the prospect a lot of people thought he was, this line is really good all of a sudden. And you know what? Like to your point, Lamar's running out of excuses. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, what is there to say? Like the defensive side of the ball is absolutely stacked out. That is the strength of this team far and away. As much as you have that two-time MVP on the offensive side, the real strength of this team is on the defensive side of the ball where there's not one weak position group. So with all that said, how could the Ravens not be in the playoff tier?
Moving in to the Cincinnati Bengals, we both have them as our early playoff exit. And Dobbs and I were just talking about Brad Robbins, the 25-year-old punter for the Cincinnati Bengals. And that man is 40 for sure. Because
Brad Robbins, you're lying. Like we need birth certificate checks. You're lying.
Have you seen the Benchwarmers where the older pitcher hands the ump his birth certificate with like a 20 in it and it says I am 12? That's what that shit is. He looks, bro. There's no way he's 25.
This man hit a scam, bro. The NFLPA is getting scammed, bro. There's no way.
But anyway, we have them both as the Bengals as early playoff exits. I think with a healthy team, this team every year should be expected to go to the Super Bowl. We've seen what they can do. We see what Joe Burrow did early in his career. You still have Jamar Chase. You still have T. Higgins. You draft Jermaine Burton. You beef up the offensive line. Yes, I understand. Like, I don't really want to play the injury scenario here because, yes, Joe Burrow has been injured, but I just don't feel comfortable with that. I think my concern probably comes in on the defensive side. I think we saw last year their defense regress a little bit. Now, obviously, they went out and got Geno Stone. They brought back Von Bell. So they really addressed an issue that needed addressing, but they lose DJ Reader. They bring in Sheldon Rankins. You know, Trey Hendrickson is asking for a trade. I don't really know what the deal is with that situation. So I do like the Bengals to be a competitor this year for the Super Bowl, and I could see them, you know, at their floor losing early in the playoffs. I don't really know how they missed the playoffs though with a healthy team.
No, yeah, like that's kind of just the bottom line is again, and again, when there's not much to say, it's a really good thing. Like the bottom line is, yeah, they should be making the Super Bowl when they're healthy, and that's or not. But that sounds, you know what I'm saying. That should be the expectation for this team, as I'm sure it is in the locker room, in the meeting rooms. That's the expectation for this team. And yeah, on the offensive side, I think my concern is to your point. Look, I can talk about Joe Burrow's injuries. I'll reframe it to that the offensive line. You have a lot of guys that are getting older that also have some injury history along the lines, especially the guy you just signed. So there's definitely room for and Amarius Mims, who literally is in the same position, even being a rookie. Like, how long is he going to stay out here? How long can we figure out a way to get him out here consistently? And then on the defensive side, I agree with what you're saying, though. Like, it kind of like we were just saying about the O line, not necessarily the injury stuff, but more just like you have a lot of guys that were cores of this team for a long time that are kind of getting up there in age. And again, like we were talking about with I'm trying to remember who it was when we did a collab. One of the content creators, one of the great guests we had, was mentioning how, you know, teams always like to, and fans of teams always like to say, like, well, you know, it's another year. Like, they're only going to improve. Like, they're only going to get more familiar with the
Oh
system.
yeah, I
But
remember.
no one ever says, like, well, what if he gets older? What if he doesn't play as good next year? Like, that's a real thing in the NFL that fans never want to just consider. And it's true. Like, you only have every player's shelf life is very different. And a lot of guys can start really, really teetering off once they get past that 29-30 range. And the Bengals have a lot of guys that are kind of tweaking right around that range right now. And it's like, you know, I think it would just be asinine for me to sit here and be like, yep, the same old Bengals, right? Defense that we've seen that can be a Super Bowl championship getting defense. A lot of these guys are getting older that were part of that team. And yes, in a perfect world, if you're a Bengals fan, yeah, these guys, right? Your Logan Wilsons, your right, like all your guys, Hubbard, like are going to still produce really well. But if they don't, you all of a sudden have a fair amount of holes on this team. And if guys, right, like I'm blanking on the man's. If Miles Murphy doesn't make a big jump, if guys you haven't spent high draft picks on recently don't make big jumps, all of a sudden this defense could find itself in a range where you're kind of mitted out, and that's not a good situation to be in. But it's the reality. And you know, but again, the bottom line is you have Joe Burrow, and if Joe Burrow stays healthy, it mitigates a lot of that. But just because we got to talk about every team. That's kind of my in-depth look at the Bengals. Is like, yeah, they should be a Super Bowl contending team, but there's still a fair amount of questions on this team, and you'd be lying to me to say that that's not true.
Yeah, I think that's one of the teams that I think the general concern for them has kind of gone up the last couple years because after they lost, you know, the Super Bowl, I don't want to say it's been downhill, but we just haven't seen that type of like play from them consistently. And obviously we know the Bengals start slow, but I really do think that needs to change going into this year. Moving in to our next team, the Cleveland Browns, you have them as an early playoff exit. I have them as barely missing the playoffs. That team to me was better with Joe Flacco playing. And Deshaun Watson hasn't had a good year since 2020. At what point, I think if Deshaun Watson does not have a decent year this year, that it's kind of like, okay, this whole thing is cooked. It has to be, right? Like, it has to be. If you did all that and you don't win playoff games and he's not your franchise guy, it was one of the worst trades ever. I think if Deshaun Watson does not play that well, because they're not going to bench him, he just did not look good, and I don't doubt their defense at all. I don't, right? Their offensive line, pretty good too. But Nick Chubb is a little bit older. He had a gruesome knee injury. Jerome Ford, yeah, he's okay. But it's like, I don't love their receiver room. And if Deshaun Watson can't get going with a kind of a mid-tier receiver room, I could see them missing the playoffs.
No, and that's again, so that's completely fair. That it is, and you know what? I'll be completely transparent. Here's all it really is to me. Is I put so much faith for this tier into Kevin Stefanski. And maybe I'm overcompensating it. Maybe I'm giving too much credit to Kevin Stefanski. I just feel like what he's shown he can do, now a two-time coach of the year. I'm like, you know what? Especially when it's just more than anything, I look at this defense and I'm like, you know what? This defense is going to allow for, even if Deshaun doesn't have another good year, I think Deshaun could have a very mid to poor year, kind of how we've been seeing him play. And even with that, I just feel like, and to your point, I don't know what to expect out of Nick Chubb, but I feel like, you know what? Jerome Ford, Dante Foreman, for the scheme that this offense runs, they can still fill that hole really well, even if Nick Chubb doesn't come back and be vintage Nick Chubb, to the point where they take enough off Deshaun Watson's shoulders that even if he has a bad year, I think this team still is just so talented across the board that it's like, that's kind of just how I'm looking at the Browns. You have almost everything filled except for the QB, which ironic. It's so ironic at this point, given the trade. Like it's ridiculous. But that's kind of just how I'm looking at the Browns, where I'm like, okay, you know what? Like I would just be selling this whole roster short to not say that I don't, and Kevin Stefanski, to say that I don't expect them to make the playoffs. And the bottom line is I do expect Deshaun Watson to turn things around. I don't expect like some huge Deshaun Watson Texans revitalization turnaround, but I expect like that's at least the guy who can help get them to the Super Bowl. That's what I expect to see this year because the roster is too talented for it to be anything else. And if it is anything else, oh man, we're going to have a lot of drama for the Browns this offseason. That's kind of just the bottom line.
All right, let's move the Browns to the barely missed the playoffs. Pittsburgh Steelers. We both have them as a top 16 pick. I mean, the inevitable 9-8 is inbound. Regardless, whoever you play, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, it's going to be the same record. We know what the Steelers are. Yes, I like their draft. Yes, I think they've revitalized their O-line. Yes, I think they've upgraded at OC. Do I think they improved in the wide receiver room? Losing Deontay Johnson? No, I don't. Do I think George Pickens is ready to be a wide receiver one? No, I don't. Do I think that their running back room will probably be better? Yeah, I think it will. I think their defense will probably be even a little bit better than it was last year. You know, you bring in Cam Sutton, and regardless about how you feel about him, he is good depth to have in that cornerback room, along with Joey Porter Jr. So, Patrick Queen, it's going to be very interesting to see if he can produce without being next to a guy of Roquan Smith's caliber. And TJ Watt's going to do what he does. Do I see them making the playoffs in the AFC? No, I do not. They will probably be a top 16 pick. I would bet on them being a top 16 pick more than I would bet them barely missing the playoffs.
No, yeah. And it's like, if again, you could say this for like any year recently with the Steelers, but because he has nothing left to prove. There's nothing left to prove. But if Mike Tomlin can take this Steelers team to the playoffs, I mean, it's just like, man, like this. But again, there's nothing left to prove. I would just be another year of amazing credit to add to his resume, because if Mike Tomlin wasn't on this roster, that's actually what's funny is like you have a lot of Steelers fans, you know, that are like, oh, I get Tomlin out. And your guys are ridiculous. Everyone who is not a Steelers fan sees it clear as day. Mike Tomlin wasn't on this team. You guys would have been having multiple rebuilds, multiple, right? I can't say multiple. Things would have been being rebuilt by now, right? Like there would have been a complete restart if it wasn't for Tomlin.
So here's my thing about the Steelers, Dobbs. They've been lauded for bringing in Russell Wilson, bringing in Justin Fields, right? They're both on basically one-year contracts. So my thing is, what if neither of them work out? You're back to square one in a weak quarterback class, similar to when they were picking Kenny Pickett. And my thing is, the Falcons had the opportunity to draft Justin Fields when Arthur Smith was the coach. And the reason they did it, from what I heard, was Arthur Smith was not a fan. And ultimately, it comes down to the GM. I understand that. But we've seen how Russ has worked out with Hackett. Yes, it's Hackett. With Sean Payton, who we know is a Super Bowl winning head coach. So my thing is, and Tomlin, I guess, is too. But Tomlin really hasn't had a good quarterback since they had Ben. So I understand why this idea of having both of them looks really good on paper. But if neither of them pan out, yes, it is low risk, But it's also like you have a very talented roster, and you're going to spend the next couple of years looking for a quarterback unless you go to the veteran route, which you just did.
See, okay, and then no, and I agree 100%. That's what it's very polarizing. What I thought of real quick, we used to away from the camera for a second. I said I put together a little tangent. And this is really, and again, I'm sure Steelers fans right know this. Like this isn't, but it's kind of just like because I've never thought of it this way, but it makes sense when you think of it this way. And it's almost like like little side tangent here, little rant. But a lot of teams like they go to the route of like, let's sell out all of our resources. Let's sell out for one big run, right? Like it's the big run, like it's the run.
Rams are the
right?
perfect
Like,
example.
We gotta win it. We gotta win it. Wait, I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I said the Rams are the perfect example.
Well, exactly.
Works,
or you could do the Jets recently. Like, you could do a lot of examples. But what's funny is, and this is where I'm going to bring the Giants into this. I think the Steelers are looking at this much like the Eli Manning Giants, where they're like, you know what? Like I'm going to look at it like this. Like, it's not about being the best team because the reality is you don't have to be the best team to win the Super Bowl. Fortunately, in the football, it's one game, and you show up or you don't. The Steelers look at it very much in their philosophy is like, you know what? We just want to be able to make the big dance every year and have a chance. And if we can win 3 or 4 games in a row, you don't have to have the best quarterback in the world. You don't have to have the best team in the world. You just got to be able to get hot at the right time. And with the coach like Tomlin, right, with the defense like the Steelers, philosophy makes sense. And to their mind, they're like, you know what? If Russ can have a hell of a 3-4 game stretch and we can make the playoffs, we got a chance just like everyone else. And in looking at it like that, I can't fault the Steelers for the way that they're approaching things because it makes sense, right? Like you could go all in and just shit the bed and you have to restart from square one, or you can just play like how the Steelers play it, where you kind of just got to maneuver a few pieces here and there every offseason, but you're always competitive, even if it's not top tier competitive. Fortunately, you don't have to be top tier competitive to win a Super Bowl because all you got to be able to do is win 3 or 4 in a row, which even bad teams can do at times. So it makes sense the way the Steelers have gone about this. I don't want to like harp on it like how I used to kind of like, oh, the team building process is bad, because really it's not. But the reality is, to your point, is Justin or Russ going to be the guy to get them over the hump?
Right.
I don't know. Like very, very likely not at this point.
Moving in to the NFC North, we have the Chicago Bears. I think both of our floors are top 16 pick here. They picked at 9 this year. They've made some really big upgrades in terms of in the receiving room, in the quarterback room, potentially. And then, you lock down Jalen Johnson, a lot of young guys making a step this year. And basically how their team is built, their roster is good enough where it's like they should be in the top half of the league in terms of where they're picking in the draft. They should be picking 17 to 32 this year.
Yeah, no. And I know, again, there's a lot of people that are going to be in the comments, biased. I'm a Saints fan. I'm not a Bears fan. Like there's no bias here. I'm echoing your sentiment 100% as a non-Bears fan. And it's like, that's where people need to get a grip on this, because here's the thing too. Again, I'll be Caleb's number one defender. I don't give a shit. I'm a Saints fan. I will be Caleb's number one defender as I feel like I've been the whole draft process. I don't care. Dude, if any of you that have the nerve to sit here and kind of like, I didn't want to say question Caleb, but yeah, question Caleb. Look, you haven't cut on the tape. You clearly don't see the transition of like prospect to NFL ceiling. Like, yes, there's a process that goes about turning potential Hall of Fame talent into a Hall of Famer. Like, it's not just he's going to step in the league and be a Hall of Famer right away. But if you've been crunching the tape and you see what Caleb Williams' ability to do is, you hear how he verbalizes that all he cares about is winning football, the camaraderie he's already built with this team on such a short notice. There is no doubt that logically the Bears are going to improve this year. Granted, I don't know how much the improvement is going to be this first year, because there is going to be a lot to learn. There is going to be a learning curve for Caleb. But if you're one of these people who just thinks Caleb's going to step in and be a diva and miss the learning curve and flop out, I mean, I got bad news for you, because you're wrong. That's just not what's going to happen with the guy as talented as Caleb Williams. With the receiving core as talented as this, with a scheme that in Shane Waldron's scheme that is going to heavily complement this receiving core and Caleb Williams, it's just the Bears are not going to regress this year. They might not be a playoff team. They're not going to regress. And then to speak to the defenses as quickly as possible, you have a lot of young ascending, not stars, a lot of ascending young guys, a couple young stars. potential stars. Like the Bears defense is nothing to scoff at, and they played really well towards the end of the season. If I tie all that together, how could I not say the Bears are going to have an improved season? I mean, that's just logically how I'm going to look at it.
I'll just leave it at that. And I just want to make a point that the jump from pick 9 to 17 is only 2 wins. Like, that's the reality. Like, their floor should be a top 16 pick because they should be 2 wins better than they were last year. Moving in to the Detroit Lions, we have them as an early playoff exit. This one is kind of simple because they were moments away from going to the Super Bowl last year, and I think only got better in the offseason. So if they're losing in the wild card round or divisional round, it's going to be very, very upsetting for Lions fans because you added DJ Reader. You added the only thing that really concerns me about the Detroit Lions would probably be their wide receiver depth. Now, I know you could argue that Sam Laporta is probably your wide receiver too, and Jameson Williams can take a step. But outside of that, you lose Josh Reynolds, so you just kind of have Khalif Raymond. Obviously, you lose Jonah Jackson, so you bring in Kevin Zeitler. He's good. He's a little bit older. They upgrade the DB room. Like, I just looking at this roster and how they play for Dan Campbell, it is hard for me to say that they could miss the playoffs. I think this is probably going to be a number 1 seed, number 1 to number 2 seed in the NFC, or top 3 seed, I should say, between, the Eagles and the 49ers and the Lions. I think that's probably what it is. So losing early in the playoffs is probably their floor this year.
No, absolutely. And it's like, if you're willing to argue against that, you're just, and I don't really know how many of them even exist. Being a Lions hater just sounds foul. If you're a Lions hater, though, however, that's the only way you're going to look at this case and say that they're not going to be an improved roster. That was already, to your point, a fantastic roster, a very much Super Bowl contending roster. And to your point, I wanted to add just only thing I really have to add because you nailed everything. The wide receiver depth is definitely concerning, but the advantage the Lions have over a lot of other teams that maybe don't have the same wide receiver depth, I mean to say that same lack of wide receiver depth, is that the Lions had the advantage where the old line and the tight end play is just so good, and they're going to move so many bodies in the run game that your receivers have so much less to worry about because they're not the focus. Like, teams are focusing on stuffing the box, figuring out how to stop the run. So you have just so much more opportunity, so much more one-on-one, so much more space as a receiver that it's like there's really just no excuse not to produce. It's kind of like how the Patriots used to be all the time, where you need one guy that's a really good pass catcher, or in this case, I get like 2, right? It's kind of like literally like that's how the Patriots always operate. You have an X guy or a slot guy that's dominant. You got Gronk, and it's kind of the same thing now with the Lions. Like, you got Amon-Ra as your slot beast, right? Looking like a future Hall of Famer. And then you got Sam Laporta also looking like a future Hall of Famer. And the other guys, they don't have to be world beaters. They have to know how to sit in zone. They have to know when it's time to keep running. They have to know the simple, right? They just have to know simple cutoffs and what to do. And then if they do their job, they're going to be just fine. And they're pros. They've been in the league a long time. It's not like minus Jameson Williams, which is, I guess, the contingency. But to Jameson Williams' point, we have a lot of ceiling that probably still can be tapped into. So it's not like it's the end of the world. Yeah, they don't have tons of receiver depth, but you get a huge pass from your team like the Lions that can just maul people, and you get a bunch of cushion.
Moving into the Green Bay Packers, we have them as barely missing the playoffs for their floor. I think the thing is, like, between Jordan Love and CJ Stroud, I think the biggest concern for them is that coaches now have tape on them, and maybe we can stop what they were doing last year. Now, if me and Dobbs are both very high on Jordan Love, we think that the Packers could be, dark horse Super Bowl contenders this year. I could also see a year where their O-line doesn't perform like they wanted to. Jordan Love kind of gets caught up to a little bit. I still think he can learn from it, but it could just be more of a down year. And I could see them, they got hot at the end of the year. What if they don't get hot? So I still think this is going to be a very competitive team. I don't know if I would say they would be picking in the top 16, but there might be a scenario where, they may be that 8th seed in the NFC.
No, and again, I don't think that with the Packers, this is one of the teams when I know you agree with this. It's like when you were typing this, it's like you're like, it's the floor,
Yeah,
but
right.
there's a very slim chance they're going to reach their floor because as we already talked about in the ceilings episode, again, before you leave So mean comment. There's a ceilings video too, guys.
Yeah,
This is
there's
not
a
like,
happy
you know what I
one.
mean? Like we've discussed the positives. Trust me. This is just the negative side of things. Unfortunately, it's the yin and yang. We can't just discuss the positives without discussing the potential negatives. But a team like the Packers is the you lean much more towards their positive side. Like, yes, at their worst, right? And I think there'd be a few things that have to happen for that to happen. And you already nailed one of them. Like if the line play has a big dip and guys go down, Elton Jenkins isn't healthy for the majority of the season or the full season, and then Jair Alexander's dealing with injury issues again on the defensive side. I think it takes a lot of things like that because the way this team is built right now and with Jordan Love is just like I just don't see regression really in the books at all unless something catastrophic were to happen to like a bunch of very important people or like if Kenny Clark has a big injury. It's like you would need one of the absolute like cogs of this Packers machine to go down for anything really tragic to happen. And it's like, I'm not, well, obviously, I'm not going to like zone in on that being the
Right.
reason of something happening. So it's like, the reality is this Packers team should make an ascension. If they don't, they're going to barely miss the playoffs and it's going to be a few minor changes and back to still the same team core because there's nothing about this core is going to change, right? It's kind of just the reality.
Right. Moving into the Minnesota Vikings, we both have them as a top 10 pick. I think the overall concern here comes from the quarterback position. I like that they added Dallas Turner. I think he'll be good for them. I think he'll work pretty good in the Brian Flores defense. Their cornerback room outside of Sean Murphy Bunting is pretty questionable. But the season is really going to hit.
You mean Byron Murphy? You always
I always mix them up, bro.
You are Sean Murphy Bunting is I don't know
On the Cardinals
you
now.
always like put Sean Murphy Bunting instead of Byron Murphy. You gotta reverse them.
I know. I have them mixed up. My apologies. Byron Murphy. I don't like their cornerback room. Their defensive line. I like that they added Grenard. They have Ivan Pace. They have Cashman. And Andrew Van Ginkel's good. I think their defense is fine. And I do like Jordan Addison. I love Justin Jefferson. Obviously, like these are not like any shockers. T.J. Hawkinson is going to be out for the first half of the year, probably, maybe even a little bit more. Aaron Jones, I think, was the best addition that they could have had to the run game. I think picking him up was super underrated. But we know what Sam Darnold is. We don't know what J.J. McCarthy is going to be. And I would bank on J.J. McCarthy being more successful under Kevin O'Connell and having those weapons than not. But we don't know when J.J. McCarthy is going to start.
Yeah, and again, it's funny because Vikings fans are like really defensive. I don't know why. Like I don't know. This didn't like in the comments recently. Like Vikings fans are like really defensive about their squad, and I want to be clear. It's not a bad thing. Like Vikings fans, it's good you have a lot of faith in your squad. It's good you have a lot of faith in Kevin O'Connell. That's the point. Trust me, Viking fans. Let us be clear. It is me and Hunter do not have zero faith in the future of this team. I actually would say I can't speak for Hunter, but I'll say for myself, I have plenty of faith that the Vikings' vision for the long term actually looks really good. But that doesn't always translate to this first year. And especially, because I'm saying first year in terms of the JJ McCarthy era, which is what Vikings fans expect and want to be the long-term solution. You can't just expect JJ to come in here and light it up year one. It's just usually isn't how things work. There's a developmental arc. There is. You use Josh Allen as your kind of example in this case. It doesn't matter how high a player's ceiling is. It takes time to get there. This is not Madden. There is not just someone sitting there with the controller finding the open. It takes time. Getting used to NFL concepts, NFL timing, it all takes time, right? And the bottom line is, though, you have a lot of good depth outside of the QB position. So to the point of like, it's not the roster we don't have faith in. It's just the situation at quarterback. It's gonna take time. It's a timing situation with the Vikings. It's nothing more, nothing less. You have a lot of good pieces on both sides of the ball. And I also just wanted to say, because it's true, like we're with the Byron Murphy, with your thing, Byron Murphy, Sean Murphy Bunting.
Yeah.
My version of that is Byron Young, and then who I always mix up Byron Young with, dude. I always mix up Byron Young with Byron Murphy.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
It's just sometimes it's just everybody has like one player like that where the names are similar enough you mix them up.
Always.
So I'm definitely not innocent on it either, bro. I know exactly how that goes. But yeah, the bottom line with the Vikings is you have really good pieces all over. The Blake Cashman edition, Chef's Kiss, did not get enough attention this offseason. I think he's going to be a huge part of this team for a long time if he can just stay healthy. Biggest contingency with him. But yeah, bottom line, Future for the Vikings looking really bright. Immediately, though, there's going to be a little bit of rain before the sun can shine.
Moving into the AFC South, we have the Houston Texans, and we have them as an early playoff exit. After seeing the success that we saw out of the Texans last year, out of CJ Stroud, out of that offense, out of that defense performing out of its mind under D'Amico Ryans, they bring in Danielle Hunter. They trade for Stephon Diggs. They bring in Kamari Lassiter in the draft. They bring in Joe Mixon as a running back option. Upgrade from Devin Singletary. The Houston Texans are in right now. They want to compete for an AFC championship this year. They want to compete for a Super Bowl. Losing in the wild card or the divisional would be an upset, in my opinion.
No, it would be. And to your point, why am I blanking? What I was just going to say. Well, I'm sorry. What I was going to say is Kamari Lassiter. I'll start with this. Because there was a lot of questions as we've been addressing this kind of, even from the moment he got drafted. Kamari Lassiter's tape, you love it. The big question was, is his athleticism going to translate to being able to be like an outside corner in the NFL? And he's looked damn good at camp from everything I've seen, everything I've been hearing, where he's been out here. He can guard, he can stay one-on-one with Stephon. He can stay one-on-one with Nico. If you're a Texas fan, that's like Christmas morning to hear his first year. I mean, especially knowing that that's one of the weakest parts of the team on a team that really doesn't have many weak points. I mean, everything you said is just, it's the bottom line with this team. Like, this team is a team that went from zero expectations to we have our guy and we have our guys. This is a roster that can 100% compete for the Super Bowl this year, contingent on the O-line just staying healthy and protecting CJ. I mean, really, like, even in terms of the skill position guys, you have room for, like, not speaking any of this into existence, but you have room for an injury or two on the offensive side, minus the offensive line or CJ, because you have so much depth, even on the O-line, for fuck's sake. I mean, you have a fair amount of depth all of a sudden, where that's kind of the reality is if you're the Texans, it's like there's no excuse to not improve this year because you already had a really good year last year and you only improved and added way better depth. So every Texans fan would agree. You got to make a jump this year. And that's all there really is to it with the Texans.
Indianapolis Colts, you have them as a top 10 pick. I have them as top 16. I just think with what they added in the offseason in the draft with Latu and A.D. Mitchell, and if Anthony Richardson stays healthy, and I know it's the floor, but like, I'm not trying to do injury with Anthony Richardson because it's only been 1 year. I think with his legs, it gives them such a high floor, especially with the receiving options, and they added to an already kind of loaded defense. I personally don't see how they could be a top 10 pick this year. So let me know why your reasonings are.
No, you know what? I'm not even kidding when I say this. I'm switching. I'm switching without even thinking about it. Like, truthfully, I don't know what got into me. Like, you make fun of me in the comments. I don't know what got into me with this one. I don't know. I really don't know what I was thinking. Colts, you're right. I can't change Steichen what he showed us last year, even if, because that was kind of my thought process. I was like, well, I don't want to incorporate it with money teams, but with the Colts, it was kind of like, if A-Rich goes down again and the morale being down, but it's like, nah, Joe Flacco's there, upgrading the backup QB, and you upgraded a damn good backup QB. If Gardner Minshew is the second best backup QB in the league, Joe Flacco is the best, right? I mean, it's a good upgrade to have, right? It's not. I mean, also you can't get much worse from last season, if any worse. You shouldn't be getting any worse. They should be making improvement. Yeah, I'm switching. Fuck what I said about top 10. I was capped out. Top 16, without a doubt. This roster just made too many little improvements. They have way too good of an offensive line. The defense was playing very, very black and white last year. Like, there'd be a week where you're like, oh, this unit it's coming together. I can see the identity. And then the next week you're like, oh man, they give up like 500 yards. So that's the biggest question mark on this team, is just like, can this defense find an identity this year? But outside of that, I don't see them being any lower than the top 16 pick. I don't know what guy MB would say in top 10. I really don't. Sorry, Colts fans.
No, I mean, that's the biggest thing. I just think Shane Steichen elevates this team so much. And if you have an athlete like Anthony Richardson at quarterback, along with the additions that they made, I find it hard to believe, because they picked 15, that they're really picking any worse. I could even play with barely missing the playoffs, but I think I need to see a whole year out of A-Rich. But overall, we have them as top 16. Jacksonville Jaguars, we have them as a top 16 pick as well. I think the issue with the Jaguars for me, Dobbs, is we have yet to see like consistency for a long-term basis with the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence. They lose Calvin Ridley. I wasn't too upset that they lost him. I don't know if Gabe Davis was the answer. Brian Thomas Jr. was the answer. Now, I like Brian Thomas Jr. a lot. I do. And I think Eric Armstead was a great addition. But the wide receiver room is just kind of muddy to me. I don't see a clear one, between Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, and Brian Thomas Jr. Now, I love Evan Ingram, and I think Travis Etienne is a good player, but their line still scares me a little. It's just a very up in the air team this year.
No, yeah, like they are. And to jump right over to your point, because I've harped on Gabe Davis enough. If you've watched any of the content this offseason, you already know my spiel on Gabe Davis. I'm not even going to get into it. I think as far as Brian Thomas Jr. goes, love the upside. But as we've talked about before with BTJ, I guess, it's kind of like, we're in a realm where as an LSU faithful myself, like he's got hell of a talent, but the route tree is not all the way there yet. And I don't think that route tree is going to develop in just one off season. Like, oh, he goes from being like generally just streaks, outs and curls to like he's got the whole number one route tree you're going to need to be that number one in this offense. And he's going to have to be because Christian Kirk's playing the slot. Gabe Davis is not a number one. Gabe Davis at Y, it's as high as we're going to see him on the depth chart, right? So we're in a situation where your personnel doesn't necessarily match like what you need out of them to an extent. And about the O line, like, and again, I want to be clear, not BTJ can grow into being an amazing receiver. I just don't think like this season specifically, he's going to make every jump he needs to be that alpha, like 1,000+ yard, like, oh yeah, he's for sure that the X receiver we need kind of guy this year. I just don't know if I see that. And with the O line, like, there's just, I'm going to say it in as nicely as possible. It's just a mitted out unit, right? Like it's very, very middle of the road. And if anything, Anton Harrison has got to make a really big jump this year for you to feel good about that pick last year. And on the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot of pluses as opposed to like, minuses. There's definitely much more good than bad. I wasn't a big fan of the way that they approached the depth necessarily in the draft this year. I feel like there was a lot of reaches. We could have done other things with the picks. I mean, we already talked about this in our draft episodes, et cetera, et cetera. But, the bottom line is, as we've said about the Jags, and I know you agree with this 100%, I can speak for both of us on this one. The Jags' direction is generally just a little bit confusing. Yeah. And I don't know if that direction is going to lead to major improvement this year. I expect it to be similar to last year, except the difference being that they actually end up making the playoffs. But it's like, how much better are they going to be? I don't know.
I do see the Jags being a better team this year. I think Doug Peterson, if he takes back play calling, they'll be in a much better spot. So I just don't see the year that we saw from the Jags last year, where they started out pretty hot, and then maybe the one seed narrative was true hot, and then they blew it all up. But overall, I mean, I think they should be better with the additions that they made. It's going to be interesting to see how that offense works, though. Moving in to the Tennessee Titans, we both have them as a top 10 pick. So, Dobbs, why do you have them as a top 10 pick?
So I'll say this. So just to give Titans fans, some positives, some hope, something to cheese at here. I think of all the teams that I had in the top 10 range, I will admit the Titans are perhaps the most polarizing, where I look at them and I'm like, they've grown on me, I think is the easiest way I can say it. Like, from the beginning post-draft process to here today, June 13th, I think I've grown a lot on the Titans where I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, I'm starting to see the vision. Albeit that there's a lot of contingencies in that vision that have to go correctly. And I think that's why that their floor is having them be a top 10 pick. But what I'm really trying to say is like, they could completely shatter that expectation and like be a much better team than that. But again, I have to stick with my baseline and my objectiveness. The reality is we haven't seen enough out of Will Levis yet to be able to say for sure, like, okay, yeah, Will Levis is for sure going to make a big jump this year and 100% be the guy going forward. We've seen the flashes. Now we need to see it be consistent. But if that can happen this year with this receiving core, and if you got guys on the right side of the line that can make a jump, center through left guard and left tackle, you feel pretty good about at this point. All of a sudden, this offense could really be a productive unit with Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. This offense, I'm seeing the vision. And as far as the defensive end goes, a lot of people, like Devondre Sweat pick, Devondre Sweat was an overdraft. Bullshit. Bullshit. As far as schematically drawing up a 3-4 defense that the Titans are going to be running, having a Devondre Sweat is a complete fucking game changer of a move. So I don't, again, the pre-draft, whatever. They're playing football, man. Again, could these be red flags? Sure. But what the bottom line is, I expect Devondre Sweat to come in and have a hell of a rookie year and be one of the identities of this defense. And if he can be that, which I believe he can, all of a sudden Jeffrey Simmons, who had a pretty poor year relative to what we know Jeffrey Simmons' ceiling is, Jeffrey Simmons has a revitalization. Sebastian Joseph Day can play well off of that. Harold Landry can be a really productive pass rusher off of that. All of a sudden, and then the DBs get better because when the pass rush is better, we know all of a sudden, I gotta admit, the Titans are the most polarizing team that I have in the top 10 because they could completely shatter that expectation. It is so handedly on Will Levis' shoulders, though, that's why I couldn't, you know what I mean? I couldn't say they're going to be a great team or a good team, but it's possible. It's on Will Levis' shoulders. That's kind of just the bottom line for them.
I think that was my biggest thing is if Will Levis is able to mesh with the Brian Callahan offense. And another thing that you can think about is like they traded for L'Jarius Sneed. They paid him. What if he regresses? Like he's not old. He's 27, but we know that like cornerback years are real volatile. So if the O-line doesn't work like it's supposed to work and Will Levis can't get in a system, I think that's where we find that kind of top 10 finish. I don't think so. I think, like you said, like they're one of the most polarizing teams where you just don't know where they're going to end up, especially when they're in a division like the AFC South, who have really competitive young quarterbacks and really competitive young teams. So it's going to be a very interesting year for the Tennessee Titans. As we move in to the NFC South, we have the Atlanta Falcons, both finishing as a top 16 pick. Yes, they added Kirk Cousins. He is a 38-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles tear, something like that.
Let me check. Kirk's gonna be he'll be 36 by the end of the year.
Oh, 36. I lied. Okay, so while I think Drake London is a dog, I think Bijan Robinson is a dog. I think Kyle Pitts can be a dog. I really like Darnell Mooney as their wide receiver 2. I think he's a better wide receiver 3. Zach Robinson is their OC. Is going to be very interested to see, what they do. They used their 8th overall pick for Michael Penix when they could have drafted the best defensive player in the draft, regardless who you thought that was. Their defense still needs a little bit of work. That defensive line is questionable. So I think the defense is really going to be the issue here. Now, hopefully you bring in a guy like Raheem Morris, who is a defensive-minded head coach, who's able to raise the floor of that defense. But I could see this team being kind of just like, there's so many new parts where it's like it's going to take them a while to mesh. And while they might be better, as a whole, like moving as a whole, and it might not look as wonky as last year's 7-10 finish, I could see them finishing in the, bottom 16 of the league and not really getting things going until 2025, if that makes sense.
No, and that's exactly how I view it too. And again, this is just floors. Like you have to have a floor. The floor for the Falcons, it would just be disrespectful to the other teams that we have, right? In this range of barely missing the playoffs, early playoff exit. Everyone that we had fitting into that range is teams that have either been in the playoffs very recently or made a run in the playoffs very recently, right? Like we couldn't just throw the Falcons in that range. It would actually just be unfair to everyone else that we have in that range. The floor for the Falcons, the bottom line is just from what they've shown us, the pedigree, the uncertainty in the new staff, because you can't evaluate what you haven't seen yet. Like, yeah, they have a hell of an O-line. There's still a lot of question marks on the defensive side. There's definitely still questions in the offensive corps. And yeah, in the ideal world, Kirk Cousins comes in and changes everything, and there's an 11-5, 12 and you know what I mean, it's 12-4 type of whatever, 12-5, 11-6 type of season. But it can very well lean 50-50. That's kind of the bottom line with the Falcons.
No, yeah, it's going to be, I feel like no matter what, unless the Falcons win a playoff game this year, I think there are some Falcons fans or just general expectations from the Falcons that they're automatically going to be like a Super Bowl contender. I think the expectations are far too high for the Falcons this year. I think they need to be leveled out this year. Not saying they can't be that. I'm just saying like there's a lot of moving parts, and I think people are a little too high on them this year. So it's going to be interesting to see what they actually do. Moving into our next team, probably one of the easiest selections in here. We're going to put the Carolina Panthers as the top 3 pick. they upgraded the interior of the O-line. The O-line should regress positively more towards average compared to what it was last year. You know, you upgraded your wide receiver room, you upgraded your running back room, but you lose probably your best player on defense in Brian Burns. So you have JC Horn, who's kind of been injury prone throughout his career. And, you know, what if Bryce Young doesn't take that step with Dave Canales? I mean, I think it was a good pick for him. Like a good OC pick for Bryce Young after what he's done with Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield. But the reality is the Panthers roster is not very good. In the past, they have not drafted that well. I understand it's a new GM and everything like that, but you know, it's going to take some time. And I just, you know, you have Deontay Johnson, you have Adam Thielen, you have, you know, Xavier Legette. I still think they could have done a better job picking up receiver. I don't know if Legette was the best option for them just because of, you know, you're trying to develop Bryce Young. Why are you going to take a project in a wide receiver? Why not get the sure thing? So it's going to be interesting this year. I still think the Panthers are probably a favorite to have a top pick, and they'll actually have it this year. So if I had to pick the worst teams in the league, the ones we have in the top 3 pick, like that was what I would feel the most confident about.
No, yeah. And again, like the Panthers are, look, Panthers fans, because I hear you guys, you know, like, you know, acting like a lot of people act like there's been no changes. No, there has been. And again, in terms of like the direction for the future, kind of like even because I don't want to say similar to the Vikings because the Vikings have a lot more of the groundwork already in place. But I can see like what the Panthers have planned down the road, right? And it's like they're moving towards that, and I can see it. And I think that in terms of like what you have down the road is it's not really the worst thing in the world. And it actually is probably eventually a playoff berth with Bryce Young, because I do still believe in Bryce Young. I do still believe that the way they've been filling out this O-line, if you guys can just get the skill position figured out to the point where, and again, the defense is playing good enough where they can balance out, I think that we could even see the Panthers potentially be a playoff team by the end of the Bryce Young rookie contract, which sounds crazy perhaps right now. But again, I had a lot of faith in Bryce pre-draft process. I still have a lot of faith in Bryce. Came down to the fact that the Panthers O-line last year was literally absolutely horrendous. Skill position players not doing their job, not separating. You know, that's why you brought in Deontay Johnson. So what you're hoping Xavier Legette is. And then, you know, aside from that, you know, move over to the defense. You know, you added a few guys that are like, okay, yeah, I'm seeing the vision. Like, you add Josie Jewell, Wanham, Clowney, good names to add, right? But are they guys that completely move the needle for this immediate future where all of a sudden defense is going to be some world-beating defense and change the game? No, absolutely not. So again, in terms of like the future, like I see it. It's slow, it's baby steps for the Panthers. But this year, I don't think it's going to be much of a jump, if really much, you know, if any jump in terms of like wins, loss. And it's like there's still a lot of building that has to be done, but I see the vision, if that makes any sense.
Moving in to the New Orleans Saints, we have them both as a top 10 pick. I think while the Saints have a lower floor, like the second lowest tier, I don't really see them getting to that, especially with the new offensive coordinator and, you know, hopefully players in their young ages taking that step. I think, you know, the defense is pretty decent. I think you worry about the defensive line a little bit, possibly if Lattimore gets moved. That could see a downgrade in the DB room. But I think it's really going to depend on how much Derek Carr meshes with Clint Kubiak this year. And if Olave can kind of take that step, that next step that we know he can. Like, he is a very talented receiver. I just think he's been kind of bordering that line between, like, you know, all-star and superstar.
Oh, well, I'll tell you as a Saints fan. No, that's like the best way you could say it, 1,000%. And every Saints fan wants to see him reach that superstar tier, but there's just a few little nuances in the game that we gotta get kinked out, right? He has to figure it out, the little things. But in terms of, we know, yeah, his skill and ceiling, it's all there. And I think that also goes into him getting more rapport with Derek Carr, building more of chemistry this offseason, which I really hope they've been doing. I really hope that is what we see this year, you know, as a Saints fan, obviously. But again, and I have them as a top 10 pick as the floor myself too. So, you know, no bias going in here. Like, the reality is the Saints could have a very poor season. But also, with that being said, they're also, again, they're one of those teams that's in the very polarizing tier, because the way that Derek Carr ended the year last year, And now you're improving the offensive coordinator a lot over Pete Carmichael, what we expect at least. And then, yeah, what you said about the defense, I'm with you 1,000%. Like, it's more like the Dennis Allen scheme you have a ton of faith in. There's definitely some question marks across the defense in terms of like the talent on the defense. You have a lot of faith as a Saints fan that Dennis Allen's going to keep things tight and at least keep it organized. That even if people aren't performing up to standard, the scheme just keeps everything in front of us to the point where we can still be a productive defense, even if not one of the best defenses in the league that we used to have a couple seasons ago. But the bottom line is, in terms of talent overall, and when you include that with Derek Carr, there's definitely volatility where the Saints could have a very poor year. Again, it could also be another side of things where if all the skill position guys make a huge jump, the O-line, the young guys make a big jump, could be the opposite. But realistically, with what we know about Derek Carr now, I had to lean more towards just the top 10, and they could have a really rough year in terms of that's what is very possible. And that's the floor, and that's the reality.
I think that's the big thing is there's so many question marks when it comes to will Dennis Allen be the long-term head coach? Will Derek Carr be the long-term head coach? Like this season, while they may not be competing for a deep run, I think the organization is looking for a lot of answers.
No, exactly.
Moving in to our last team of the NFC South, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a top 16 pick. So my concern with the Buccaneers is that the interior of the O-line struggles. Yes, they brought in Graham Barton, which I do like. But, it's going to be an interesting year because you have a new OC with Baker Mayfield. We saw what Dave Canales was able to do with him. They bring in, Bucky Irving. They have Rashad White. Overall, the Buccaneers are a good roster. Like, they are one of the most solid rosters through and through, I believe, in the NFL. I just feel like with the aging vets and Baker Mayfield kind of having up and down, career, I could see the regression where they are one of the bottom 16 teams in the league. And when I say that, I think they would be like 15 or 16. Like, like the Colts or the Seahawks type of thing. Like they only picked, what they picked, 23rd. Wait, what, they picked 20th this year? Or no, that was the Steelers. It was with they picked 26th actually. I'm lying because they went to the playoffs. But I just think with the way that the roster is built through Tampa Bay, it is a real possibility that they could finish as one of the bottom 16 teams in terms of draft position.
No, and again, it's possible. And I go back to exactly what you started with. Like, and we've talked about this a lot. Bucks interior, right? You assume, right? As everyone, like, to get back to the fans always think positively thing. Like, yeah, if you're a Bucks fan, you're saying like Graham Barton's going to come in and fix the issues. Like he was our first round pick, and that's what he's going to do. Well, you could point to a super recent example, the Giants last year. John Michael Schmidt, high round pick, center. He's going to come in, help us fix the interior line issue. Lowest graded center in the entire league last year. Certainly wasn't helping anything. And not that John Michael Schmidt can't improve and become a better center, but this isn't about John Michael Schmidt and the Vikings. The point is, and the Giants. The point is, this is about the Bucks, but I can correlate that example to the Bucks. Like just because you spend a high round pick on a guy and you have high expectations for him, it doesn't always work out that way, right? Like it's right. In a perfect world, all your high round picks work out. Well, I'll tell you as a Saints fan, it just doesn't, it just doesn't go that way sometimes, and that's the reality situation. So if it's another year like that, and Graham Barton doesn't translate the first year, he has a really rough first year, you're in a position, and the other two guys, your left guard and your right guard, don't make a jump. You're in a position where like, man, oh man, 3 of our 5 O-line slots are like really bad. And that's never a situation you want to be in, no matter how talented the skill positions are, like the Buccaneers. And you have faith in Baker Mayfield, obviously, but it's a different situation now, right? Like new offensive coordinator. And on the defensive side, there's just a lot of questions around the pass rush, right? Like they don't have really they don't have a dominant pass rush. They don't have an alpha pass rusher. And that someone needs to emerge as that guy. So there's questions for the Bucks for sure. And if they get answered or not is something we're gonna have to wait to see. And that's why I feel like we have them in that perfect range where, to your point, if they fizzle out and they go towards the bottom of what were our expectations, it's not like they're gonna crash and burn. They would just barely miss the playoffs, and then Todd Bowles would be out the door and it would be kind of a fresh start, which was almost what a lot of Bucks fans expected to happen last year anyway. So
you could damn near argue, and let me know what you think of this. What the Bucks are doing with like Baker Mayfield and keeping their guys around is damn near just kind of a more successful version of what the Steelers are doing, right? Like, they refuse to kind of rebuild. They bring in their guys. They always finish around the league or around middle of the league, 7-10 or higher, not horrible, just enough to be competitive. But also, like, I know it was Tom Brady, but they had that run. They won those games. Like we saw with Baker Mayfield, they won those games. So they're not trying to be the best team. They're just trying to know that they can be hot and be competitive and get to that Super Bowl. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see this year play out for the Bucs. But wrapping up the AFC South, we're going to move into, or NFC South, we're going to move into the AFC West with the Denver Broncos. We have them as a top 10 pick. Dobbs, why do you have them as a top 10 pick?
Well, how about I'm just going to start with this. And Broncos fans, don't take offense to this, but it's true. It's very true. If Sean Payton wasn't your guys' coach, I would have had you guys as top 3 pick. I would. But yeah, I have so much faith in Sean Payton and how he operates things, so much respect for him. I don't think they're going to be a top 3 pick team, right? But you look at this roster, you look at Bo Nix in his rookie year, you look at the skill position groups, and you look at the pass rush unit, a lot of spots on the defense, and you're just like, how in the world is this team going to finish with more than 7 or 8 wins? And that's just kind of the reality for me. It's like, that's my bottom line. How is this team, unless Bo Nix completely shocks the world and comes in Pro Bowl rookie season, completely shattering expectations, how is this team going to finish with more than 7, 8 wins in the AFC West? That's just kind of that's how I look at it, and it's very simple for me. Like, the talent on this roster is just not there yet.
There's not much to talk about with the Broncos, like you were saying. It's just like, if Sean Payton wasn't there, they would be a top 3 pick candidate. And I think he just raises the floor of the roster so much. I mean, look what he did last year. I actually think Bo Nix is going to be better than Russell Wilson was last year for them, because he will play in that Sean Payton offense. He will play in rhythm. And Bo Nix is very experienced in college, so it's not like he's going to be, throwing out an inexperienced rookie. Yes, he's new to the NFL, and he's going to have his learning curves, but I do think that this roster is one of the worst in the NFL. But with the way that Sean Payton coaches, and with the quarterback now that they have, they shouldn't be in that top 3 category. I would bet much more on the fact that they're a top 16 pick than a top 3 pick, but I think top 10 is a good spot for them, because it's going to be a couple years before they hit their stride. Yeah.
Very well said. I would agree with that 100%.
Moving into probably the easiest team, Kansas City Chiefs, early playoff exit. That would be their floor. Patrick Mahomes, I think every year the ceiling is Super Bowl win, and every year that their floor is, our early playoff exit. It's always going to be playoffs when he's your quarterback. So with that being said, the worst case scenario is Rashee Rice is suspended for a while. Xavier Worthy doesn't take that jump. Their quarterback room takes a hit. I mean, I don't know. Like, it doesn't matter.
If that happens, they're still probably doing the Super Bowl. Like, it is.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. So I think early playoff exit is really the reality. I don't really know how to phrase this other than because they're gonna make the playoffs. Like, okay, maybe they have a bad game in the playoffs, they lose. So that would probably be the worst scenario for them.
No, I mean, and again, let's put it in perspective type of thing, right? Like, their second round pick, who was supposed to be their first round pick, where I obviously they ended up lucking out in a hole with the trade, and it ended up working out. But funny enough, he's not even starting on this team right now. He's literally your second string left tackle right now. Like, the Chiefs have depth. They have the best QB in the league. But so for Chiefs fans, because I know the feeling, like when you have a really good team and media outlets just glaze over you. I don't want to just glaze over. I'll give it a conversation point, right? How about this? In terms of why they won't regress and they're just going to keep getting better. Look, even if, to your point, of all things you said came true, outside of that, you still have so many young guys that are just getting better. Like Trey Smith, young and just getting better. Karlaftis, young, just getting better. We got Leo Chenal, already one of the best interior linebackers in the entire league, just young, getting better. Trent McDuffie, one of the best corners in the league, young, getting better. Jalen Watson, emerging young corner, getting better. It doesn't really matter if we look at the guys getting older on this roster, that they haven't been producing as much, right? Like Niati. We could point to guys like that. It's but for every guy like that, there's a guy who's young and emerging. So that's just a story of the Chiefs. Like they've built this team incredibly well. They are going to continue to build it incredibly well as long as it stays under the same ownership and general management, which it will. And that's just the Chiefs. I mean, they've built a dynasty. There's no way you can't respect it if you're not a hater. And if you are a hater, it's because the Chiefs have beaten you in the playoffs. And that's kind of all there is to it. The Chiefs are the dynasty of the league right now. I mean,
the kids growing up now, like this is what the Patriots were kind of growing up. Like you hated them because they won, and then you realize you hated them because they were winners.
And that's why I'm not on that side of things anymore, right? Like I went through with the Patriots and unrelated, but Floyd Mayweather. Like when I was young, before I locked in and honed down, like what does winning take? Like how much dedication does it take? You just disregard it like, man, you're getting lucky. That, and the fucking third. No. They're committed. They're committed to excellence. And you can't hate on that once you understand it. That's the bottom line.
We have the Las Vegas Raiders as a top 10 pick. I think there's a lot that could go wrong. They kind of got left without a seat in the quarterback musical chairs. Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, and then you have AP as the coach. So I do think teams will play. I think the Raiders will play better than their roster says because of the type of coach AP is. But they do lose Josh Jacobs, and they add Brock Bowers. So there's more weapons for whatever quarterback is going to be playing. But Luke Getsy's their OC, and we saw that worked out in Chicago. So we're going to get to see if it was Justin Fields or Luke Getsy, and also if the Raiders have a quarterback of the future in Aiden O'Connell. It's just like there's so much on this team where it's like their roster is not that great. I do love their defensive line. It's a lot of money there, but realistically, because of the quarterback play and the OC, they could be a top 10 pick again this year.
No, and so just like we said though about the Titans, I want to be very clear to Raiders fans. This is one of the ones I felt really hard about doing. Like I felt really bad putting you guys into this range. But again, it's the floor. And if the floor hits, that is the floor for sure. Again, like betting man thing, I don't necessarily lean towards that being the case. I would lean much more to like them finishing out very close to how they did this year, where you're right in that range where a couple more wins, you'd be in the playoffs. You're in it's a tough situation. Very tough division, very tough conference. But in terms of like the way the roster is built, outside of the QB position, we're getting to a point where like you can say they've honestly started to build, not started, but like they have actually built a competitive roster all in all, right? I mean, like through the free agency acquisitions, through the draft, through the scheme that Antonio Pierce has brought to this team, this is a team that can be competitive, but it goes back to the QB room more than anything. And you're kind of just like, how high is the ceiling with this current QB room? That's really all there is to say about the Raiders. I mean, the pass rush is going to be insane. The defense should be really productive again. But it's kind of like a lot of teams we've seen over the recent years. You can even compare like the Jets last year. Not that the Raiders offense is going to be like that's disrespectful, but you get my point. But that's also like that I don't expect the Raiders defense to be as good as the Jets last year. So you get what I'm saying? You kind of like tune up, down a little bit. And you kind of get that same middle ground. Like really good defense. The offense just isn't doing enough. And most weeks, you're going to be a little bit out leveraged. That's kind of just how I view the Raiders.
Moving into the last team in the AFC West, we have the Los Angeles Chargers as a top 16 pick. I think adding Joe Alt, yes, their skill position group may be one of the worst in the NFL, but Jim Harbaugh, to me, just raises the floor so much, similar to kind of the Broncos, and I think they still do have Joey Bosa, they have Khalil Mack, they have Derwin James. Regardless about how you feel about them now as players, there still is that level of competency on the defense, and we know that Jim Harbaugh is probably going to get this O-line working. You have a star quarterback in Justin Herbert, something that Denver doesn't have, and I think with the way that the Chargers are kind of built, and I think it's going to take a year or two again to see the full vision, I still think they should be, their floor would be like kind of at the very middle of the league.
No, absolutely. Again, and it just comes down to Justin Herbert being, again, people, when I say this, I don't know, some people think I'm kidding or joking. It's objective. Like historically, one of the best, if not the best quarterback in history for how long he's been in the league. It's just objectively true. So it's like when you have Justin Herbert, it's like, and now with the Harbaugh connection, and we've seen, again, back to pedigree. When you combine those pedigrees, the floor can only be so low. And it's like again, I don't necessarily expect them to be a playoff team this year, but echoing your same exact sentiment, like they're knocking on that door, like they're establishing that roster where they're kind of they're taking a fish to the door this year. It'll probably be a bat next year, but there's just a little bit more that has to go into the roster building process as far as this year goes. Still a few more holes that need to be filled, but all in all, you can look at this roster and not only see the vision, but you can say to yourself, like, you have a lot of faith in the QB position, which is far and away the most important thing. You'll figure out the skill positions. You'll figure out the holes. You'll plug and play on the O line where you have to plug and play. And soon enough, the Chargers will be back to being a playoff team as long as Justin Herbert stays healthy. I just don't know if it's this year, and I'm pretty sure that's basically exactly how you feel about the situation, right? I mean,
I think it's going to take some time. I think there's going to be a lot of turnover that could affect their record this year. Moving in to our last division, we have the NFC West with the Arizona Cardinals as a top 10 pick. I love what the Cardinals are doing. I think getting Marvin Harrison Jr. to pair with Kyler Murray and then also drafting Trey Benson to go along with James Conner. I think the Cardinals are set up for success this year. And I'm not talking about make the playoffs, but I could see them as one of those scrappy teams that may be fighting for the 7th seed if everything goes right. With that being said, though, their roster still has a good amount of work to be done, and there's a lot of young players that still need to be developed. So I could see them picking in the top 10 again this year. I think top 3 would be a reach because of how many additions they made, and they picked 4 this year. So with that being said, I think the Cardinals sitting in a top 10 pick would be a safe floor.
A safe floor. And again, I would expect them to be somewhere right around that 9 or 10 range. Like an improvement this year nonetheless. But my biggest contingency, and I think, Cardinals fans might be salty to hear this, but the ones that are being very realistic also would understand where I'm coming from. And it's hard to find that in the NFL. It's hard to find fans that would like it.
Yeah.
But the thing is this. When you're coming back from a major injury and you're the type of quarterback that Kyler is, it's very hard for me to just, a lot of people are just like, oh, like he can hit the ground running like he used to. Like, why would he not? It's like, this is professional football. Like, there's a lot that goes into it mentally. There's a lot that goes into it physically. And it would be, again, asinine as fuck for me to just sit here and assume like Kyler Murray's going to come back and be the exact same Kyler Murray we saw pre-injury. Zero doubt that it's not going to take him, some time to get reacclimated. And I know he came back last year, but that's kind of my point. Is he came back last year and it wasn't anything like super impressive, and the tape wasn't world beating by any means. And to that point, he's got to get reacclimated. He's got to get back his feet back on the ground. And when you deal with an injury like that, does it take a little bit of that top speed off? Does it take a little bit of that gear he had away? That's to be determined. And so that's the biggest contingency for me is I'm just like, look, I would love to see Kyler get back to being old Kyler. As I called him, Squirrel Murray. The man moves around different than anybody else. He literally, it's I said, like there's different, like Lamar, and we got guys that they're shifty, but it's in a different way. Like Kyler is so just quick and just he's so small you can't even reach him. It's like chasing a squirrel around. If a squirrel's a guy in your house, what I'm talking about, and you got to get him out. It's like trying to get Kyler Murray down behind the line of scrimmage. But again, can he get back to that same version? Is what is to be determined, and that's really just the bottom line. I would be lying to sit here in front of the camera and say Kyler's back 100%. And I guess if you're a Cardinals media, if you're Cardinal, whatever, that's what you have to say because that's what your fans want to hear. But I'm looking at we observe all 32 teams objectively, and I'm sorry, Cards fans, I need to see it visually before I can speak it. And if Kyler can come back and be the same Kyler, though, to your point, potential playoff team, 100%. It's just there's a lot of contingency around Kyler.
Before we move on, let's just get this very straight. I think me and Dobbs are both very high on what the Cardinals can do this year, especially with how their team has been constructed and their coaches. Moving into the next team, we have the Los Angeles Rams as barely missing the playoffs. I think whenever you have Stafford and McVay, you kind of expect to make the playoffs. And last year was supposed to be a down year, and they still made the playoffs. So I think at the end of the day, if you miss the playoffs with those two combinations, that is probably going to be the disappointment. And when you look at the Rams, you could tell that they're not one of the best rosters in the league. It's very young, but I think you expect to make the playoffs. So the floor would probably be, missing that 7th seed mark with the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, and again, if that were to happen, it's more like there would be some injuries in place. Like I think the way this roster is currently constructed, again, like we said, you're not betting against Staff and McVay. You're just not. But if Staff misses a few games, and Puka and Coop miss a few games, all of a sudden we don't have Aaron Donald anymore to pick up all the slack and to be the absolute Iron Man that we had on defense for so long. And again, you love who you replaced him with. Like you love Jared Verse and Braden Fisk as the replacement. But the reality is nobody's going to replace Aaron Donald to a T, especially this first year like that. So there's going to be a little bit of turnover. There's going to be a little bit of getting used to the fact that we don't have somebody who can just beat their block, beat their double team every single snap. There's going to be a little bit of adjustment to that. And if the adjustment is as critical as it could be, and Tre'Davious White comes back, not the same Trey White that we've seen some injuries now are adding up, and Cam Crow comes back and doesn't get back to the same version of Cam Crow we know, because Cam Crow's has had a really good years, and then last year was kind of like, Cam Crow's it was inconsistent to say the least. So there's contingencies on defense very much, as there is on offense with injuries. If this team doesn't make the playoffs, the bottom line is it's going to come down to injury. And if they end up making the playoffs, it's because they stayed healthy. I think that's kind of just the only way I view the Rams at this point.
The Rams are the perfect example of if you can make the playoffs, you can win a Super Bowl. That's exactly what the Rams are as a team. Moving in to the San Francisco 49ers, it's got to be an early playoff exit. They have been so close to closing out and winning that Super Bowl. If they were to lose in the wild card or divisional round, I think there's going to be a lot of questions in San Francisco, because it's like, the reality is, how do you make this roster better than it already is? You arguably have the best, if not one of the best rosters in the NFL, and you're going to eventually have to pay these players. It's kind of the issue with Ayuk and Debo. That's why you draft Ricky Pearsall. But then Brock is coming up on an extension. And I think we agree. And the more I thought about it is, Brock is not going to try to bankrupt your team. I think he knows what works. But at the end of the day, 700,000 is different than, 30 million.
Well, 100%. And again, we've been saying that for years. I think Brock is going to be more on that Brady side of the spectrum, like without having the wife that's making just as much as him. So credit to Brock where it's due. Like, he doesn't have that same crush that Tom had as well. But hey, it's big money regardless. But the point is, I think just the makeup that we see that Brock generally has, the way he goes about himself. You don't expect him and his agent to walk in there saying, "I'm top dog," and like, I need that top dog money. Like, you know what I mean? The Niners are going to cut on the film, and they work with each other very well. But that's the bottom line. They work with each other. Not Brock is just carrying the whole load and he's holding everything up. So the bottom line is, even if they get the contract done, to your point, $30 million is just, it's astronomically higher than what he's being paid right now. And with Ayuk and Debo, when we've talked to Niners fans, we hear from Niners fans, the ideal perfect world, like you keep both of them and then you find ways to like rotate Ricky and like Jacob Cowing in. But like we've been saying, like, I don't think they spent the draft capital they did on Jacob and Ricky just to kind of like rotate him in at 10, 15 snaps a game. Like, I think that if not this year, immediately after this year, they look at them like those are our starting guys potentially. And like, and again, if you've been listening to anything pre-draft or anything, I mean, me and Hunter both are incredibly high on Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing. I think Jacob Cowing was like the most underrated receiver in this year's class, far and away. But regardless of all that, there's a lot of questions of how that they're going to answer these contract situations. And the only way we're going to find out is at the end of the year this year. But the bottom line with all that said is that the Niners are still expected to go win the Super Bowl. And if they don't at least make it back to the Super Bowl or the NFC Championship, to your point, Hunter, there's going to be a lot of questions out there in San Francisco that need to be answered.
Moving on to our last team, we have the Seattle Seahawks as a top 10 pick. I think, I did like their draft, but with the new coach, it's not a new GM, but it's a different dynamic without Pete Carroll there. Because from my understanding, when Pete Carroll was there, whenever a player was picked, there's basically two layers of approval. It was the coach and the GM. I think it's strictly the GM now. And we do like what we saw out of the Seahawks defense, and I think Mike Macdonald can raise that floor. I think after losing Shane Waldron, I'm a little bit concerned about what their offense is going to do. Geno's getting a little bit older. They trade for Sam Howell. Their running backs are good. Their wide receivers are good. Their line is a little shaky. So I just see it where one of those seasons where, again, there's so many moving pieces and you have a quarterback that's kind of he was their starter. Now he's, in my opinion, kind of turning more into a bridge guy, which is what he's been traditionally. Seahawks are probably a top 10 pick floor this year.
Yeah, and again, I want to say like and they're the last team, so literally it'll be the last team I have to say is about. But like the third or fourth one today, where I feel bad having them as low as I did because I very much wanted to lean them to like top 16. But again, like we're talking floors, and the floor is like, look, if Gino has a really bad season and regresses a lot, which is again, like we talk about with shelf life with guys, everyone's always perfect world. He's just going to keep improving. He's just going to keep getting more acclimated. But the reality is, new offensive coordinator, Gino's getting older. That sometimes is a combination that can result in disaster. And on top of that, Sam Howell, new system for him too. We've seen that Sam can look really good at the ceiling, and he can look atrocious at the floor. So we don't know how with Sam Howell, we'll just middle him out, and we don't know what the expectations. You don't know what the expectations are because there's really no baseline for what we should expect. Again, new offensive coordinator for everybody. It's going to be a whole new offense. And when you have questions about the QB already, and you're putting it with a new offense, generally we're going to lean towards it being a more poor result than a good one. And I think that's kind of just the bottom line as far as the offense goes. On top of that, the offensive line last year was just really bad unit. And if guys can't get healthy again and play how they did the rookie year, namely Lucas and Cross, and then the interior guys, Bradford you drafted recently, these guys don't make a jump, you're going to have a lot of holes to fill, a lot of questions to answer before you can even go about developing a QB. And I love a lot of the young defenders you guys have, right? I love the pass rushing combo of Nuoso and Mafe. Like I think the Seahawks defense has a lot of underrated things about it. You have Spoon, you have a lot of guys, right? But as we said about the Jets and a few other a few other teams today, your defense can only carry you so far, even when they're playing at their peak. And that's why I think the Seahawks fit very much to that same contingency as these other teams, where I expect the defense to be a very productive unit. But if the offense isn't holding its end of the share and it's holding up its weight, it's only a matter of time before things kind of start to crumble and fall a little bit. I think that's kind of exactly where the Seahawks fit into.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been the You Don't Know Ball 2024 NFL Team Floor Tier Rankings. As always, if you don't know ball and want to know ball, be sure to subscribe and leave a like. Let us know in the comments who you think could be a top 3 pick that we did not have in there. And thank you guys so much for watching. We'll be back next week.